Hello, I believe I am live now, and this is my first Facebook Live event, and I'm excited to be here with whoever is here with me. So our topic for today is what is happening. If you saw the invitation, I assume you're here because you saw that invitation. And yeah, that's where I want to begin. Let me just say a little bit about myself if you don't know me, if you've just found your way here because of the topic. My name is Suzanne Anderson. I'm a psychologist, an executive coach, international speaker, and the co-author of the book, The Way of the Mysterial Woman, Upgrading How You Live, Love, and Lead. So the title of the book probably gives you a sense. My area of expertise and interest has been women, and in particular working with the awakening of consciousness in women. What does it take to actually wake up more fully to who we are? And then how does that translate in terms of the leadership capacities we actually are able to express in the world? And this ties into the topic that we are exploring here today, like what is happening right now and how does this impact us as women. So on my website, which is mysterialwoman.com, I had a little video made about a year ago actually, and it's an evocative 3-minute video. But at the very beginning, the way I started out is with some interesting music and images, and I'm saying something is happening. Something is happening. And I do this because my sense is, and with the hundreds of women I've been working with over the years, that as women we are sensing that something is happening, and we don't know what it is. And in the absence of some larger context about what is actually going on right now globally, I think it's extremely challenging for women. So this is what I want to say a little bit about now. And I'll say that in our book we go into a lot of this a little bit more detail, but this is the place now that I want to have the conversation with you about what is happening. And I hope you'll dialogue with me. I'm figuring out how this works, but I believe I can see comments as they come down the right-hand side here. And I would really love your input or questions you might ask or ways you want to engage me as we explore this together. So one of the things, again, on the video, is one of my favorite quotes that I say right after this sort of evocative sense of something is happening. It's a quote by Arundhati Roy, and she says, "Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." Now this is really beautiful to me, and it speaks at the highest level, and I want to put that out there as a sort of invitation to what is happening. What if what is happening and the pressure that we're all feeling in our lives, or many of us are feeling in our lives, is evidence of a new world that is on her way? I want to start there talking about that, and then later I want to talk to what it would mean to actually be quiet enough that you could hear her breathing in your own life. What I see in women right now is an enormous sense of pressure and an intensification, as I said in the blurb that advertised this Facebook Live event, of emotion right now, of fear, of anger, of grief. It's like we're sort of in a shakedown right now, or shake up right now, and what do we do when we're in this shakeup if we don't know that this is actually potentially the sort of birth pains of a new world? Well, we try to dial it down, right? We take medications. We numb ourselves out with TV or workaholism or addictions of various kinds. We try to distract ourselves. We have this outrageous rate now. I think it's something like 1 in 4 women are on antidepressants in the U.S. right now. Now that's really scary. Like something is happening right now, and we don't like the feeling of it, and so we're dialing it down. I'm not saying that it's not very wise in various phases of our lives to use antidepressants. That may very well be, but there's something about this epidemic that concerns me, and I think it's a way that if we don't actually go and explore the root causes, we just keep medicating the symptoms out at the edge. So feel free to comment, by the way. I'll just keep saying this as I go along. If there are things that I'm saying that you can relate to, I think you can do thumbs up, or you disagree or you agree. So this, what if, in a way, what if the possibility that this time isn't let's say an anomaly, like this really shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't be seeing what we're seeing here in the US or around the world, and we shouldn't be so uncomfortable. We shouldn't be so unsettled. What if that's actually not the case? What if there is, in fact, a dying going on of an old order, a paradigm that actually rightly needs to shift, and the only way that it can shift is that it begin to fall apart. And we don't like that. We don't like to be unsettled. We don't like things when they're falling apart in our own lives, of course. That's not much fun. But what I'm suggesting, and this is what the research that we did, that we lay out in our book, really says, is that we are at the end of a 5,000 years, this is a lot of years, millennia, of a hypermasculine paradigm of wholeness, a way of being, a way of doing in the world that is simply at its end. That's not to say that it wasn't wrong or that it wasn't useful. In fact, it was evolution's way to move things forward over time. But now the cultural imperative is actually asking for something very different. And this has to do with the awakening of a deep feminine impulse. It is simply time. So I go back to that quote again that I gave you by Arundhati Roy, that a new world is on her way, is on her way. This is simply needed. We can no longer meet the complexity of these times with a consciousness that is dominantly operating out of a rational worldview, out of a mechanistic worldview, out of a power over worldview, out of a competition instead of collaboration worldview. We have complex problems that we cannot solve, as Einstein famously said, at the level of the consciousness that created them. So here we are then being urged by evolution herself or itself to grow. And at any developmental inflection point in our own personal lives, those growth times when we've shifted from a developmental perspective, when we were crawling and we learned to walk, when we learned to speak, when we were teenagers, learned to go after what we wanted with our gang, all of those phases are awkward and uncomfortable when we have to let go of a way of being and open up to a new way of being. Now, I think we're in one of these shakedown times right now, and I'd love to hear what you all are finding. Maybe just you can type it in. I think I can, let's see how I can read these comments. Yeah. So you can let me know what you're experiencing. Are you feeling this shaking up? Now, one of the I'll say the holdovers from this phase of the hypermasculine, the I think, therefore I am gift of Descartes, is an over identification with the mind, and we could even say an over-identification with things going up and out, with light over dark, with wanting the fast solutions, wanting things to be better quickly, with a discomfort with anything that is down in the body. And when we're looking at this shake-up time, if I bring it out of the cultural, evolutionary, larger picture for the moment into the personal experience of women and of men. I see there are men on the call today, which is great, because of course this shake-up is not just happening in women. It's happening for all of us right now, but my own research has been specifically with women and what it takes for us to wake up this next level of our capacity as women. I do believe that men are facing the same challenge of the requirement to awaken the deep feminine within themselves. This was Jung's contribution at the turn of the century, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, where he really, the father really of psychoanalysis, and he did this early pioneering work of identifying the masculine and feminine aspects within men and women. And I find it easier sometimes to talk about them as yin and yang, so we don't get confused with gender here. But certainly for men, the same thing is required, this awakening of some of the feminine capacity without losing the healthy yang aspect of the ground of being. So I'm hearing something. I'm just going to read one of the questions here. I don't know if you all can see these questions. I hope you can. I think you probably can. So a question here is, could you say something about the collective fear of men that is arising at this time? Yeah, that's a great question. I do have a view on this, and I suspect, Diane, you do too, but I think this is a one-way thing. You can only type to me. So I'll share my view of this. In this shakeup, it makes sense to me as the call is happening now for the rise of the deep feminine. Some of us could talk about this. I say the deep feminine, could talk about it as the divine feminine, this very sacred feminine impulse that is rising up, that is the great mother, the cosmic mother herself, the earth mother, and connects to the very ground of our being as women, the feminine rising. But as any of these impulses rise up, and there is the requirement to make space for that new voice, let's say, that new expression, that new stream of water that wants to move through. And the way I see it, and I've experienced it, is that means the old water has to get pushed out as well. It's that principle of no two objects can occupy the same place at the same time. So the old structure, and this old structure within us and in the world pattern, has had a dominant masculine nature. And what we are seeing now, I think, in the world pattern is the arising, as this feminine impulse actually starts to move, of the yang shadow. We've certainly seen some of this in the United States. I think we're seeing it around the world in some of the contraction back into me, my world. Other is dangerous. The dark is dangerous. Anything different is dangerous. Close the doors. Here we're seeing it in some of the rolling back of women's rights, or the attempt to do that through the defunding of Planned Parenthood and other movements that are happening now through the rolling back of some of the environmental protections of the Earth Mother herself and so on. So we're seeing this rise in some of the shadow elements, and I think we also feel that in ourselves. And a fear, many of us lived for, our lives and maybe earlier lives inside the fear of being punished by the masculine and being shut down by the masculine, being burnt at the stake by masculine, being stoned to death, being killed for just simply being female. So we have this in our collective DNA, women and men actually. So I don't think there's any way to go through this time of transition without some of these emotions arising. So this brings us really to the topic of the day, which is, if we have a sense of what the bleep is happening, if we accept that we are in this kind of time, how then are we working with our emotional capacity? And this is essential. So what I was saying earlier about coming down from the I think therefore I am to I am in a body, and I have feelings, and I also think, and therefore I need to come in to learn this instrument. And I think we are very unequipped to, right now, men and women, to really understand the instrument of the emotional, of the heart and the body, because we haven't been down and in very much. There's a beautiful quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist teacher, some of you may know, and he said, "Go back and take care of yourself. Your body needs you. Your feelings need you. Your perceptions need you. Your suffering needs you to acknowledge it. Go home and be there for all these things." Now this is hard, especially when it looks like we got shit to do. There are things we have to do. We have to show up in the world right now. This is not a time, we saw this in the Women's March, when we're going to sit down. We are going to have to do very specific things, acts in the world. But my concern is, what is the place from which those acts arise? What is the consciousness from which we source those actions? And if this consciousness does not include the heart and the body, if the consciousness does not arise out of the deep feminine ground of being, then I don't know that those actions are going to be that different. And I don't know that we will be able to sustain the momentum we're going to have to sustain to continue to act. This is a very long answer to your question, I know. But I do believe it is about coming in 2% more at a time to be able to metabolize the emotional trauma body that we are living in, that is not just our own family of origin trauma body, but it's been passed down generation after generation through the lineage. How do you do that? How do you do that? Well, this is what I'm very interested in. I'm interested in how and this is the research I've done for the last 15 years, has been particularly for women, how do we do the work of opening up a channel for what's trying to come through right now? I've called this way of being for women, but I think it actually could work for men too. I think the word will translate, mysterial. This mysterial way of being that's seeking to come in now, we could say that's the new world that's seeking to come in, a new consciousness. I came up with that word because there didn't seem to be any word that really captured what we were seeing in terms of this new way of being that was arising in women. And the word mysterial was this great blend of the capacities we saw. First of all, the ability to be with the mystery, the uncertainty, the ambiguity. And clearly we need that right now. These times, as we've already said, are very uncertain. But then the other element that we saw was this capacity that Tony Wolff, who was Carl Jung's creative muse and collaborator, called medial in women, which is the ability to bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, between differences, between myself and other. And this ability to really hold a lot of complexity at one time. And those two words together became the word mysterial. So what I was interested in, and the work I do now, is really how could that channel open for this innate potentiality that I do feel is a kind of evolutionary imperative right now. It wants to come forth. Evolution never, we don't make these big changes, and we've seen this over over the cycles of time in our culture because we want to. We make them the big changes in consciousness because, as I said before, the problems that we are encountering are larger, are more complex than our current consciousness can deal with. So we're pulled to grow to the degree that we are willing to be unsettled, to go through the discomfort of the change and not try to get back to just where we were. I mean, one of the good things, or let me say one of the good is too generous a word, one of the offerings from the election results here in the United States, I would say, is that for women, and I've seen this in my own work, there was a kind of complacency, like we're on this steady curve. We've been since the women's revolution, really. We've been steadily breaking through glass ceilings, and we're always going to keep on moving forward. And this is all great, and it's all good, and I can just sort of sit back and let others do the work. And now there's a recognition that that's actually not so. This is something I've been trying to say for 10 years, that we are not done. That development was, I think those stages, especially that first stage in the 60s, we call this the beginning of the second feminine epoch, actually, that happened in the 60s after 5,000 years of the masculine. This sort of breaking up by a very dynamic yin, kind of maiden-like essence that really pressed against establishment, against the ways things have been, and wanted, this is the sexual revolution, the women's revolution, the equal rights, the drug psychedelic experiments. It was like everything to shake up the patriarchy. And in 50 years, we have had, it's extraordinary. If you look at it in the great sweep of time, what we've actually accomplished in 50 years. But I don't feel we're done in any way. We're done as women in terms of coming into our wholeness, or what actually was initiated then has come all the way through to the translation in the structures of the world and the ways we're actually doing things. We're still stalled at 17% of women on boards in films. We're still at 78 cents to the dollar. We still don't have health care and daycare and childcare and organizations where we should have. I mean, there are securities that we took for granted that are being challenged now, as I said earlier, are being rolled back. So this urgency to wake up right now is really key. How we respond to it, and now I'm back again to coming home to ourselves. How we respond to it is everything. Because the tendency can either be to be terrified, as you were bringing up, Diane, and either rush out to just do anything and everything, or be terrified and say, "Wow, forget it. I'm not even going there," and capitulating. Because what difference can my voice actually make? Let me see if I've got any other questions here. I would love to hear what you're all finding here. Why do you think this change would be led by the feminine? Why will it be changed? That's a good question. Well, I suppose, you could say because there's simply a rebalancing required. I mean, we have to ask, I have a point of view on this, and my own research would say it has to be led by the feminine because that's been the missing element. In the great yin-yang dance, which is the very, the dance of creation, obviously at the most basic level, the sperm and the egg that come together, and there we have creation. We see that in every aspect of our lives. Well, when we look at that, we go back through time. We know we had about 50,000 years of time when the mother archetype was really the governing impulse, the deep feminine. The great mother, the great surround, the clan, the holding in, the gestating, the being one with, not wanting to be different. And then about 5,000 years ago, we saw this first really strong masculine, kind of warrior, heroic impulse come in. And that has moved for 5,000 years. Of course, a lot of recorded history, so this is what we really read all about. into then a more organizing, structuring impulse, which was more of the kind of a father masculine wave, and more patriarchal, appropriately so, the monarchs and the kings, and then that led to the modern world of the corporate leaders and the executives and the lording of the rational mind, the cultivation of the rational mind. And we've created a world right now that is beautiful as a result of all of this. But it absolutely requires now that the honoring of the feminine, I can think of the feminine here in its broadest sense, let's say, the capacity to know through not knowing, through the surrender of knowing, to flow, the ability to flow, not just have this focused way of doing things, bigger, better, over, power with, collaborative, connective ways of being, the valuing of the intuitive and the emotional ways of knowing. We've seen this rise in the last 10 years of emotional intelligence, which is beautiful. Emotional and social intelligence, which are getting a lot of traction. Languages that actually just simply are needed now. And we see this in many of the leading edge corporations, actually, where they're recognizing that we don't just need token women in positions of leadership. We need women who have these other ways of knowing on board. And that's, by the way, been my focus and concern. Now, the Dalai Lama said, I think this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, when he was out here on the West Coast in Vancouver at a conference, and he made the very strong statement that the Western world would be saved by, or the world will be saved by the Western woman. And, there was a lot of kind of gathering around his words like, yes, we have to stand up now. And I think he meant, and certainly I mean, that it will be saved by women who have a new consciousness on board, are operating with what I call a new consciousness, a new operating system. We actually have to upgrade this operating system. This operating system that's been passed down generation after generation is due for an update. Of course, what happens when our computer needs an update, when we have to do that, we need to upgrade our system. Well, it starts to shut down, right? Crashes, and we hope that I'll just do a few prayers over it, I'll shut it down, I'll reboot it, and it'll kick back in because I do not have the time to stop and upgrade this. So let's just make it all better. Maybe it works a couple of times, and then of course ultimately you're going to have to do it. I think that relates to these times we're in right now, this sort of shakeup of these times. That it isn't about just rearranging the deck chairs on the sinking Titanic, or for women to get a few more behavioral skills to be able to make it in the world today and be the agents of change. I really feel that we need to do the difficult work, and this means we've got to go down and in. So we're back to Thich Nhat Hanh's words. We actually have to come home to ourselves. I'm loving hearing from you, and I'm sort of reading some of your comments here, and I just love that that you're with me and chatting with me. Of course, I could talk about this all day, and and I guess I do talk about it a lot, and certainly my book has a lot about it, I think that this is a time to be with others right now in these considerations. So I hope that you found this interesting to be in the conversation. I'm going to do more of these because this seems like a great way to talk to people I don't normally get to talk to. And being in community is one of the reasons I've started doing this work in an online way. Now I'm running online courses, and I'm starting a Facebook page, and that's one of the first things you can do is come to my Mysterial Woman Facebook group. where I hope that we'll just stay in conversation together. I've just opened it up this week as a way that I can be in the dialogue with those of you that aren't direct programs with me. Comes to my website and you can find out more about what we're up to and get engaged in the conversation with us. I know it's a little different kind of conversation here maybe than, I'm not giving you some easy answers. I'm actually saying it's hard right now, and I'm not sure it's not going to get harder. That these aren't easy times. They're even dark times. But what I'm interested in helping women do, and partly through my own journey, is learn to see in the dark. Learn to be comfortable in the dark and become able to, first of all, welcome your own suffering as it arises right now, as a sign of your own waking up, and also to recognize your own longing, like this longing I see in so many women of the possibility of a new world, and not to lose hope, to hold on to that faith. One of the things I write about in the book is that one of the key things, we know this through the brilliant work of Fred Pollock, who was a social scientist in the 50s. And he did this amazing work actually without a computer, which is quite incredible, but tracking what was one of the key factors when a culture was in transition that could tilt the movement of that culture toward the positive. And the one factor that he found was a small minority who held a positive image of the future, a positive vision of the future. Now, that's hard to do, to hold this vision of the future when everything is shaking up around you, because it's almost, it's emotionally difficult because you can't necessarily see how to get there. But I think those of us that are on the edge of evolution right now are part of this vanguard bringing in this very new, almost species of being, this new consciousness. We have to be willing to hold a vision of what's possible and energize that daily at the same time as we come back into our own trauma body and bit by bit bring ourselves back to ourselves. So let me just end now, because I don't want to lose you if you're still with me here. But I want to end with a very simple thing you can do, and it's actually a beautiful work that Dr. Kristen Neff has done around the potency of self-compassion. And this is one of the key things. This is the very bedrock of where we begin. As Thich Nhat Hanh was saying, we come back to our own suffering. In my work, it's the very first gate, healing the mother wound. It's essential in this path that I've decoded, which has 5 gates. This first one brings us home to ourselves. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just take a moment to think of some suffering you've been through recently, maybe today. In other words, sometime when you were emotionally activated and didn't feel good. And so just bring that into your awareness. And then I'm going to invite you to put your hands on your heart center. And you will just, if you can do this somewhere where you are and you can say it out loud, I recommend that you do that. There's something about hearing this by voice that's actually helpful. And you would say your name here, I'll say mine. You can just repeat after me. Suzanne, this is a moment of suffering. This is hard right now. I'm really letting yourself feel this. We all struggle in our lives. I am not alone. May I hold myself with tenderness in this moment. And may I hold myself with kindness in this moment. And may I be compassionate with myself in this moment. And then take a deep healing breath. And this is such a simple practice, but I personally know that I've found it very helpful, especially those of us that are here very concerned and committed to change on the planet, to taking care of others. And certainly as women, we have this very strong other orientation. We can forget that we must come back to ourselves and in very simple ways be with what we are feeling without over-exaggerating it or without denying it. And I have a little more, by the way, on this mother wound. I'm doing a series, a video series of each one of the 5 gates, and it's on the blog on my website. But I go into the mother wound a little more deeply, and then I offer this practice again at the end, if you didn't get it all. So do stay connected. You can actually on my website, I think I've said it is mysterialwoman.com. You can download, if you sign up on my mailing list, I'll send you the beliefs that we decoded here, the limiting beliefs that we found at each one of these 5 gates that seem to be present in women, kind of a shared individual and collective unconscious pattern that are the limiting structure we live inside of, and then the liberating beliefs that arise when you do the deep shadow work. And I'll send those to you so you actually can start to work with them. And I did a little video that explains a little bit about how to work with them. And then next week I'm going to do a live webinar on Thursday, the 4th of May, where I'll talk about the Mysterial Leadership Essentials course, which is my 10-week global online course. And I'll also go a little deeper into some of the things I've started to touch on here today. So I hope you'll join me for that. And thank you again so much for being with me on my maiden voyage on Facebook Live. I think I could really get to like this. I just wish I could dialogue with you, but on my webinar I can dialogue with you. So I hope you'll come. I hope you'll come back. It looks like we've just put a link here on the right where you can get those beliefs, or link to my webpage where you can get them. And yeah, so thank you so much, and stay tuned, and love to stay in the conversation with you in any way that feels creative for you. I know there are many of you out there that are as interested as I am in what is happening. All right, bye for now.